Over the past 50 years, British music has been shaped by a handful of explosive moments. In our previous series of The Rise and Fall, we told the story of the Sex Pistols who detonated punk in the 1970s. We also explored the rise and fall of Oasis, whose anthems defined a generation, and we followed the wider cultural takeover that became Britpop. But between those moments sits another story. A story that rewired British youth culture. Because in Manchester, as the 80s turned into the 90s, indie guitars collided with dance music, rave culture flooded the city, and ecstasy reshaped the dance floor.
Madchester was an insane time. It was madness. But you know what? I was so pleased to be a part of it.
Madchester changed how a generation moved, dressed and sounded. But it was also the sound of a city worn down by years of social and economic decline, rising defiantly to reclaim its voice and leave a legacy impossible to ignore. This is how it happened. It's a Thursday night in November 1989. And in living rooms across the UK, parents are sitting on sofas and kids are sat cross-legged or sprawled across the carpets, eagerly awaiting the week's biggest chart hits. And then this happens. Radio 1 DJ Jackie Brambles introduces the Stone Roses.
Stone Roses are one of two Manchester bands playing on Top of the Pops tonight. They've just finished their Japanese and European tour and they have a new entry at 13.
Ian Brown doesn't even bother to pretend that he's singing for some of the time. He lifts the microphone away from his mouth like the whole idea of miming is beneath him. Around him, an animated Manny is conjuring up his loping bass groove over Rennie's bustling drum beat, and an ever so cool John Squire is a picture of Guitar Hero effortlessness. Nobody on stage is still, nobody is overawed by being on the nation's biggest pop TV show for the very first time. Nobody cares because they know where they've come from and they know where they're heading. And they're not the only ones.
Later in the show, Jenny Powell trips over a link.
Now for a band that's come all the way from Manchester. They're called Happy Monday, featuring a very special guest, Kirsty MacColl. The song's Alleluia, and it's number 30.
But it doesn't really matter, because what follows looks like you've stumbled into the front room of someone's house party. Sean Ryder is twisting and turning like a man who's forgotten where he's put his drink down, while singing along to a record on an old stereo. Next to him, Bez is dancing and grinning and shaking his maracas, and to the other side, there's national treasure Kirsty MacColl.
The music has swagger and confidence, but like the Roses before them, the performance is as irreverent as it is nonchalant. This is Manchester's introduction to the mainstream. A landmark moment in a story of a city which had already had more than its fair share of highs and lows. Because before all the euphoria and the clothes and the drugs and the swank that was to come, before the Roses, the Mondays, James, 808 State and a guy called Gerald, before a nightclub that lost millions of pounds and a band who sold a sun lounger for crack, before the biggest selling 12-inch single in UK chart history, gunshots on the dance floor and a mountain bike crash that ended it all. Manchester had already been a musical roller coaster.
Welcome to the rise and fall of Madchester. I'm Alison Bell. Manchester's been my home for well over 30 years, and during that time I've watched a movement unfold from inside the city.
And I'm Steve Lamacq, and this is the story of a city that started dancing and changed British culture in the process. Told through the music of New Order, the Happy Mondays and the Stone Roses, and the legendary Hacienda Club. The Rise and Fall of Manchester, Episode 1, Wilderness. The tale of how Factory Records and Joy Division helped Manchester discover the first pulse of a new future and laid the groundwork for a city to learn how to dance again. Manchester began, quite appropriately, as a night out. The Russell Club was a West Indian night spot in the shadow of the notorious Hume Crescents. Outside, burned-out cars and abandoned mattresses littered the landscape. Inside, it smelled of marijuana and beer. Dealers lurked in the corners. But in 1978, along came journalist and well-known local TV presenter Tony Wilson. Aside from his day jobs, Wilson was a man with ideas, a lover of concepts and art, a music fan who'd been the first person to book the Sex Pistols to play live on the telly on his show So It Goes.
Tony Wilson, who'd become integral to Manchester's music scene, started a new night at the Russell Club, which he renamed The Factory.
We took over this strange black club in Hume called the Russell Club, called it The Factory.
Tony Wilson, cultural agitator and a man who believed ideas mattered more than balance sheets.
And suddenly we were running a club, sitting on the barrels at the end of the night, counting money out.
Inside, the room felt different to other clubs. There was no glamour at the Factory, but what mattered was the intent. Art, sound and design were treated with the same weight as the city's industry had once been. Wilson understood that Manchester needed a space to try out new ideas. It was just a room, but in the city in 1978, it was enough.
The Factory existed against a backdrop of streets which had once had a purpose, a sound and a rhythm. But decisions made elsewhere in the boardrooms and government offices far from the north had in the 1970s left industry idle and a former workforce still waking early out of habit.
Job vacancies registered at the Careers Office in the centre of Manchester are at a low ebb. Just 142 jobs on offer.
I just spend my time going out down to factories looking for jobs. I go to the same old factories all the time. If to get anything coming in, I'll take anything now. Anything that comes.
100 men on the shop floor have already been laid off. Another 50 leave this week, and there are plans for 250 more redundancies in the months to come.
Tony Wilson, however, designed The Factory to bring a new rhythm and sound to the city.
Imagine the scene. On stage, Ian Curtis moves like someone who's been forced to dance against his own will. His body jerks and stiffens. He's angular and awkward and utterly compelling. And this is only Joy Division's 6th gig. The band had formed 2 years earlier. Curtis, along with Stephen Morris on drums, Bernard Sumner on guitar and Peter Hook on bass, had been shaken into action by the Sex Pistols' notorious show at Manchester's Lesser Free Trade Hall. One you may have heard about in our series, The Rise and Fall of Sex Pistols. From this gig, bands soon started to do their own thing, and with the city full of abandoned buildings, there were plenty of places for young people with limited prospects to rehearse and play. And what they mostly came up with was a documentation of a Manchester worn down by decaying infrastructure and queues at the job centres. A young Mike Pickering reviewed Joy Division at the Russell Club for his fanzine Modern Drugs.
I just thought they were amazing, and I think I wrote something that the stage was like a block of ice, and this kind of amazing frontman came out, and yeah, they were just brilliant. It blew me away. Manchester was a really, really desperate place to live. I mean, it was grey, it was still struggling to come out of the industrial times. There was no work. It was just so grey and dirty.
Joy Division's music was tense and almost mechanical. It didn't offer escape or hope. Instead, it summoned up the feeling of a city shaking off ghosts of the past. Watching on in that room, Tony Wilson understood exactly what he was hearing.
Within months, with the aid of co-conspirator Alan Erasmus, he turned the factory from a club night into a record label. Its first release was a simple EP of acts who had played in his club: the Duritty Column, Cabaret Voltaire, comedian John Doe, and Joy Division.
And we wanted to put the first record out. We wanted to be a sampler. And we looked around. There was this remarkable band sitting there in the town, and no one was knocking on their door to put a record out by them. So I just offered.
Above all else, Tony Wilson was an enabler, excited by the creation of art. But a dyed-in-the-wool businessman he was not, and as with all future factory releases, there was no traditional contract between the label and its artists.
We felt that music was something sacred and wonderful, and as something sacred, it should not be owned by businessmen. It should not be marketed as product. Those are all our perceptions at the time, and they were fed into the way we did it. Music wasn't a product. It should not be promoted or marketed. It is just what it is, and the company that does it shouldn't own it. We should just be a conduit for great art to get to the people.
Instead, to assure Joy Division of his unwavering dedication, Tony Wilson pricked his finger and drew blood onto a piece of paper. Some would later call this contractless reverie reckless, romantic, or impractical. It was all of these things, and it was very Manchester.
Joy Division were building a focus on Manchester which would lead towards the release of their debut album, Unknown Pleasures, later in the year on June the 15th, 1979.
Now, you've probably heard something from their new album, Unknown Pleasures, on the Feelers Show, and the reviews have been very, very complimentary. When Richard Skinner met Stephen Morris and Ian Curtis from the band, he wondered whether they felt their isolation in Manchester was a help or a hindrance to their careers.
In our terms, it has been quite a good thing because we haven't been influenced by what's been going on elsewhere, really. We were apart from everything, and we sort of developed our own particular way in our own environment.
At the time when we started in Manchester, there were only 3 or 4 other groups of the new wave type. I think in Manchester, a lot of groups expanded, went their own different ways.
With all the attention that you're beginning to get in the music press and these incredibly glowing reviews for your album, deserved glowing reviews too, how does it feel for you as a band to suddenly be the thing that everybody's looking at?
To be honest, it doesn't affect us at all because when we started, we got very bad reviews. And then we got a few good ones and a few bad ones.
The album turned Factory Records into something approaching a proper business and easily sold out its initial run of 10,000 copies.
For the rest of 1979, Ian Curtis returned to the stage and repeated the same movements with the same intensity. They played almost 100 shows that year alone, but the man, like the music, and some would say the city itself, was just barely holding it together. On the 18th of May 1980, 2 days before Joy Division were due to leave Manchester for their first tour of America, Ian Curtis was at home in Macclesfield. Exhausted and away from his friends, the stress of all that intense touring had taken its toll. He'd become estranged from his wife Deborah, had started drinking heavily before going on stage, and had been diagnosed with epilepsy a year earlier. That night, at home alone, he listened to Iggy Pop's The Idiot while crafting a heartfelt letter to Deborah. He was just 2 months away from his 24th birthday.
There are a few things, in fact nothing that I dislike more than being the bringer of bad news for you, but heard during the day that Ian Curtis of Joy Division has died, and beyond this I don't know any details about it at all, but obviously our sympathies are due to the other members of the band, most particularly.
With Ian's death, Joy Division left behind a body of work that captured the atmosphere of Manchester and more broadly the towns and cities of Britain, which had also found themselves in a weird post-industrial stasis. Their music captured a city in a moment between the doldrums and reinvention. Curtis's death only seemed to emphasise the bleakness of the time. Joy Division's final single, released a month after his passing, went on to become their best-known song. A poignant full stop to their career, Love Will Tear Us Apart went to number 13 in the chart and remains one of Manchester's most defining and most moving musical milestones. Because that might have been it, except Tony Wilson and the remaining members of the band refused to accept that this story, their story, a story of transition, would end there, resulting in the realisation of a new place where sound, art and movement could all exist under the same roof.
Now at 5:40, the evening news with Moira Stewart.
The task force has landed a number of raiding parties on the Falkland Islands during the night.
The Ministry of Defence spokesman announces the start of the task force operations to recover the Falklands. He said Port Stanley and other military targets had been bombarded.
On the 21st of May 1982, British forces began the San Carlos landings in the Falklands War. Back in Manchester, the doors opened at the Hacienda.
Last year building the Hacienda Fact 51. We have the next year to decide why we did it.
Tony Wilson, wearing a dinner suit, stood on stage next to a huge white grand piano and welcomed the crowd.
Ewan, hit the music. Thank you. Happy birthday, happy anniversary. Thank you for coming.
Later that night, pioneering American post-punks ESG flew in from New York and became the first group to play the Hacienda. But the Hacienda wasn't a nightclub, it was just an idea. And Manchester wasn't dancing, it hadn't rediscovered its rhythm, at least not yet. But it had found a room where it would learn how. A room that would become legendary, not just across Britain, but around the world. In the next episode of The Rise and Fall of Madchester, New Order accidentally create the biggest selling 12-inch single of all time and somehow still fail to make any money from it.
If we could get our shit together to make the world's top selling 12-inch single, then they could have got the shit together to at least make sure they made some money out of it.
And the story of a nightclub that's too bright, too big, and at one point even builds a swimming pool in the middle of the dance floor. And by the bar, two young bands are watching the dance floor very closely. The Happy Mondays and a band called the Stone Roses.
When we went for the first time, the place was empty. Nobody went to the Hacienda except a few students and goths. The Hacienda was never full. It was really, you'd have about 15 people.
It's 1983 and Sean Ryder is standing at the edge of the Hacienda's sparse dance floor where someone has installed a swimming pool. Yeah, not in the garden of a Spanish villa under Mediterranean sun, but beneath the DJ booth of a Manchester nightclub. A surreal symbol of the club's wild ambition and its even wilder excess, because this was Madchester, an audacious experiment where every idea was worth trying, even if, like the pool itself, it couldn't last forever. And sure enough, one night, it burst. The Hacienda had the space, what it didn't yet have was the music. But at that exact moment, one of Manchester's bands was trying to invent it.
Tonight it's a bit messy, we're spring cleaning and we couldn't get all the scenery in, but we've made up with it with some excellent live bands in the studio, all of them, kicking off with New Order, playing live, singing live with Blue Monday.
Bernard Sumner looks up at the ceiling, not to the lights but somewhere just above them, as if he's actually hoping that help might drop from the rigging. It's the 31st of March 1983 and New Order are playing live on Top of the Pops. In front of the nation, their music is falling apart. The machines are misfiring, the sequencer is drifting. For 3 minutes, it feels like the whole thing just might actually collapse. Here is a club record performed erratically in a TV studio to an audience that doesn't yet know what to do. And yet somehow, it doesn't really matter. This song, Blue Monday, had been built with new technology, with a beat borrowed from the sound of New York disco and with a melody recorded slightly out of time, an aberration nobody bothered to fix. It even featured one of the first commercial samplers, a £4,000 bit of kit capable of replaying just 4 seconds of sound. When it arrived in the studio, the first thing New Order chose to sample was not a choir or a symphony or a legendary guitar stab. No, the first thing they sampled was a fart. Although no one is quite sure whose.
This live TV performance looked like chaos, and it sounded like a failure, yet within weeks, Blue Monday was everywhere. But before it filled bedrooms, common rooms and car stereos, before it became the best-selling 12-inch single in the UK ever, there was a massive room in Manchester which needed attention, where the lights were on and almost nobody was dancing. I'm Alison Bell. I've spent more than 30 years in Manchester, from underground club nights to Spike Island, and I was there when many of the stories you'll hear in this series happened.
And I'm Steve Lamacq from the BBC. This is The Rise and Fall of Madchester, Episode 2, Movement. The story of how Manchester found its feet again. From the pulse of Blue Monday to the awkward promise of the Hacienda, onto the moment when a new generation featuring the Stone Roses and the Happy Mondays began to realise that the city was theirs to reshape.
The Hacienda is simply a post-industrial fantasy discotheque and venue. It's the most beautiful disco venue in Britain, and it's a very lively place.
It's 1982 and Factory Records supremo and TV host Tony Wilson is on the BBC selling his vision of Manchester's newest venue, the Hacienda.
It's part of the Manchester scene. I mean, there are several other clubs in Manchester. Manchester has always been perhaps the major northern city for having a clubland, and the Hacienda is merely our part of that club scene.
But his vibrant vision is a long way from what was then the reality. Inside the vast echoing space by the Rochdale Canal, people cling to the edges of a dance floor that is too big and too brightly lit. The Hacienda has only been open a few weeks and it's already in trouble. The ceiling is too high and the sound drifts upwards and vanishes. The DJ booth is inexplicably hidden away and is playing to a room that doesn't quite know what it's for.
Factory Records and New Order have built a venue, an art space, a nightclub, a catalyst that they have utter faith in, but barely understand. On the Hacienda's opening night, the paint, Pigeon Blue BS409, was still wet. The sound system was tested for the first time just 5 minutes before the doors opened. And when they did open, punters wandered in, not knowing where to look, what to do, or even how long they should stay. And almost unbelievably, even for fans of irony, the old school comedian Bernard Manning cut the ribbon, then looked around and said, "I've played some shitholes during my time, but this is really something." He gave back his fee and walked out the door. Wilson, however, was probably just grateful to have the money returned, because from day one, the Hacienda was a money pit.
Early days, empty. We opened 6 days a week or 7 days a week because we thought it was our social duty for about a year and a half. I think we probably had a reasonable Saturday night, and every other night was about 5 people. You know, if you ask what it was like in the first couple of years, you know, we lost a further 400 grand or something, God knows.
In its early days, the venue tried everything. Barbershops in the basement, strippers, comedy nights, performance art. The Hacienda didn't really know what it was or who it was for. Here's early booker and soon-to-be DJ Mike Pickering.
It was a totally new concept for Manchester. It was like an oasis, wasn't it, in the middle of like the desert. I mean, it was like no one had a clue what we were doing. So we were putting bands on in there and, oh God, we were getting like 100 people, 50 people. But it took a long, long time for it to catch on.
Angela Matthews was the Hacienda manager and licensee who recalls one particular crazy idea that was tried out.
But there was even a swimming pool in the club for a few nights until the night it burst. And then there was a massive flood. The side collapsed. My mate Karen Mason was actually in her swimsuit in the pool, slid out, and then the water actually came from one half of the club right down to what we used to call the main bar, like a tidal wave.
Tony Wilson said in a 1982 issue of The Face magazine, for any real form of substantive youth culture to thrive in a city, there has to be a place to go and somewhere to meet. The Hacienda had to be built.
But its inspiration would initially come from somewhere which was already a melting pot of sounds, somewhere which had music and motion. Under a new name, former Joy Division members Bernard Sumner, Peter Hook and Stephen Morris arrived in America in late 1980, 4 months after Ian Curtis's death, to play 3 small shows. New York hit New Order hard. Whilst on the trip, their equipment was stolen. Cases, amps and pedals, all gone overnight. And when they finally got their van back from the New York Police Department, the thieves had replaced everything with a pair of skis. It's an incident that would have a profound effect on them. Here's Peter Hook.
And we went to New York as a 3-piece, and that was like the biggest, most difficult thing in the world. And then we had all the gear stolen. And so in many ways, we went as boys and came back as men, if you like.
With no tools to fall back on, and no physical link to the band they once were, they borrowed some gear and improvised, and, inspired by the music they heard in New York clubs, started to make something new. For the first time since Ian Curtis's death, something began to loosen. The weight was lifted.
The band returned to Manchester with a sense of permission to experiment. A new member joined, Gillian Gilbert on keyboards, and a new name, New Order. Here's Bernard Sumner.
Depending on how you look at it, either very rashly or very bravely, decided not to use any of the Joy Division songs to start from year 0 with a new set of songs. So coming up with a new name, and we kind of needed a new direction because otherwise it would have felt like we were just aping Joy Division with that minus Ian.
Here's Peter Hook.
The clubs we went to in New York were very inspiring because they were very simple, and also the fact that they were very open and the music policy was very open was quite refreshing, because in Manchester it was very cabaret, it was very standard. You had to dress up to get into these clubs, the old Ritz, Tiffany's, Rotters, you know. It was a very sad, uninspiring thing. When we got to New York, it was very inspiring.
These clubs became the reference point, not just for a new sound, but for possibility.
Please, please tell me now. Please, please tell me now.
It had been a chaotic morning, starting with 4 arrests at 5 a.m. when Greenham women climbed over the airbase fence. Then throughout the morning came the coaches and cars and bicycles and motorbikes clogging the narrow lanes as they deposited the links for the human chain.
It's March 1983 and Duran Duran are at number 1 in the charts. Britain's unemployment has hit 3 million and women are making their voices heard at Greenham Common. In Manchester, the Moss Side riots are still fresh in the memory.
There's been more trouble in the Moss Side area of Manchester within the past few hours. Police in riot gear have been out in force to disperse groups of youths throwing stones and bottles.
For 48 hours, the streets around Princess Road and Claremont Road had erupted with an anger that had been building for years, fuelled by unemployment and racial tension.
Well, it's just that, there's nothing for the kids to do around there. You've been throwing bricks yourself? Yeah, I've been throwing bricks. It's only right, though, isn't it? Well, it's bad news. It's right, though. What do you think is going to be the outcome of this? It'll prove something to the country to stop and look and listen what's going on around there anyway.
Manchester, at the start of the 80s, felt very brittle. It was a city of empty buildings, of cracks in the pavement and in the community.
But at the same time, along with the Hacienda, there were other new places opening and taking a risk, daring to form a different community. Manchester's queer scene found a home in the bars and basements of Canal Street, destinations where people could move away from being watched. These were rooms where parts of Manchester's population quietly learned how to come together again. The feeling at the Hacienda wasn't that dissimilar. People were now starting to congregate, but no one had yet found a soundtrack to accompany these new bonds that were being formed. Until, on the 7th of March 1983, this arrived.
New Order's Blue Monday was an experiment that broke the rules of how records were meant to work. Here's Gillian Gilbert.
It was exciting to us at the time because it was so different. I think it was, because we just went mad with sound effects and things like that, and the actual bass line. It was Barney's idea to sort of sequence all the bass line, really, because we wanted to do an encore where we could just leave all the instruments carrying on, and we even wanted to do a synthesised voice, a vocal line over the top, so we could just leave it and get off stage. So it was like a sort of experiment when it started.
It wasn't really supposed to be a hit, but the record sold in the millions. Although still legendarily, it somehow lost money on every copy. Factory designer Peter Saville had made the sleeve look like a floppy disk. It was a beautiful record, but it was also ruinously expensive. For any other label, this would have been madness, but for Factory, it was perfect. Here's Bernard Sumner.
If we could get our shit together to make the world's top selling 12-inch single of all time, then they could have got the shit together to at least make sure they made some money out of it.
The actual sleeve and the single cost about 78p. The average return from our distributor, Pinnacle, was 80p. So we made 2p profit, exactly. So 1p went to New Order, 1p went to us, and out of our 1p, we paid the 4p publishing. So we lost 3p a unit, and it just kept selling, unfortunately. It was a bit of a mistake, really.
Blue Monday taught Manchester, and in turn the rest of the country, how to engage and dance to a new alternative music. But it also quietly exposed the fragility of their record label Factory's own hard-held ideals. As Blue Monday was on its way to becoming the biggest 12-inch single in history, other bands started arriving who would also spotlight interest on the city. 2 months later, the Smiths released their debut single and would go on to establish themselves as Britain's most talked about indie guitar band, and it would be preposterous to try and work them into the story of Madchester, except to say that they did go some way to galvanising students and music fans into embracing indie discos and being unafraid to wiggle round a dance floor. More relevant to this story, though, are a group who'd actually supported New Order at the Hacienda the previous November and had started making a bit of a name for themselves around the city. That would be James, who were also signed to Factory Records. More from them later. But most pertinently came a band who would be right at the centre of Manchester's musical revolution. The Happy Mondays, who formed initially as a covers band. Here's Sean Ryder.
When we first started, we did cover versions just to find out that we could all play together, because nobody could really play their instruments. So, we did all sorts, Depeche Mode covers and basically Joy Division. I used to do this, I'm glad that no one's got tapes of that, me doing Ian Curtis, radio, live transmission, sort of stuff. So, and it was really bad.
Meanwhile, the bands who would end up spearheading Manchester's pop dominance were brought together by two old friends, John and Ian.
I didn't actually hang out with him until we were about 14.
Here's Ian Brown.
And, we used to have them 30-side football games, didn't you, when you were kids? So we would have been part of that, but I wasn't actually hanging with him. But I remember meeting him when he was a kid. He says I was naked at the time in a sandpit, but I think he was exaggerating that one. I don't remember that. I can remember the very first rehearsal, before Rennie joined. And then I can remember the very first rehearsal when Rennie joined, and that's when it all completely transformed. Suddenly we had someone in the room who could actually play a groove. electrical vibes, yeah, just buzzing like, oh great, we've got a drummer. We'd auditioned a few guys, drummers, and they weren't all that. And then he just walked in the room and was like, straight away, like we just gelled, and he had a groove, and that was great. It was like, got a groove now. We couldn't really play, and we didn't know how to write songs. We just wanted to be in a band then at that time.
It's a summer's evening in 1985, and opposite the Star and Garter pub, people are starting to gather. Having bought tickets for a party, they've been told to phone for the exact location of the warehouse where it would be taking place.
Inside, around 200 people stand round uncertainly. They've each been given a single penny, and if the police arrive, this can be called a video shoot, and everyone here is a paid extra.
At 1:30am, the Stone Roses wander onto a makeshift stage, looking indistinguishable from the crowd. Then, they start playing. Rennie's topless behind his drums, and the first kick from his kit hits the concrete and comes back heavier than ever. And with it, a room of bodies start to move. This is the Flower Show, Manchester's first ever warehouse party, illegal and headlined by the Roses. Steve Atherton went on to become a key ally to the band, but he started out by arranging, with much due diligence, this landmark show.
We had a word with the band and said, we'll form a record company, we'll make it look like we're shooting a video for the single on the record company. You can be that artist. We called the record company Blackmail Records. We cut out a ransom note from some newspapers, stuck it to some A4 paper, and then Xeroxed that, and you'd be amazed what you can get away with if you've got a little Xerox piece of paper. It was about 1:45 in the morning. My brother walked up to me after about third song in and said, police are outside, mob handed, they want to know what's going on. And I walked up to the window and I just went, yes. And he went, stop that now, get everyone out of there and get home now. And I just went, this is an official Blackmail Records video shoot. Pulled the first piece of paper out. Second one was the hire agreement for the venue, again on the letterhead. He went, got on the phone to alongside Nick saying, it's a film crew, they're filming a video. There was a brief pause, the radio crackled, the copper at the other end said, let them get on with it. It was a great night, finished it off, no violence at all, just people having a laugh. I looked at my brother and went, was it worth all that grief for that? And he went, fucking right it was, let's do another one.
Later, when those inside spilled out into the dawn, Manchester looked the same. But something had shifted.
Even at this early stage, the Roses were keen on opportunities to promote themselves differently and play in places other than traditional music venues. In doing so, they'd begun to build their own myth.
In no time at all, New Order had changed how people danced. The Hacienda had changed how people gathered together, and a new generation of bands led by the Stone Roses and the Happy Mondays had seized the chance to play. Early converts were coming on board and the rooms were now ready. But Madchester would need one more little ingredient to properly come alive. In the next episode of The Rise and Fall of Madchester, a man in Hulme smashes down the wall of his flat and accidentally turns it into the most important underground space in Manchester. And something new starts to circle the dance floor.
A little pill brought back on the ferry from Amsterdam by some of Shaun Ryder's mates. And when it arrives, the city will never feel the same again.
These pals of mine were what we call grafters. He was sneak thieves, did a bit of armed robbery. They'd been in Amsterdam and brought some pills back, and Bez had one, I had one, and from that day on it totally blew us away.
This programme contains strong language, adult themes and references to drugs.
It's 1986, and in Hume, Jamie Nicholson is trying to build a small recording studio in his flat, but he's just discovered something useful. The flat next door is empty, so Jamie does what any reasonable person might do. He knocks through the wall, and suddenly, Jamie has twice the space. Soon there are speakers and turntables and people, hundreds of people, because Jamie hasn't just built a studio, he's accidentally created one of Manchester's most legendary illegal after-hours clubs, The Kitchen. But while those physical walls were falling, something else was about to arrive that would change everything. Not a band, not a record, but a pill. This is The Rise and Fall of Madchester, Episode 3, 24-Hour Party People. The story of when house music and ecstasy arrived, bringing euphoria to the dance floor, a light bulb moment for some guitar bands, and for those looking for it, a blissful sense of escapism. In September 1985, a few months after That Set at the Flower Show had enhanced the band's early reputation, the Stone Roses released their debut single, So Young. But remarkably, that came out on exactly the same day as Factory Records released the debut EP by fellow Madchester Trailblazers, The Happy Mondays. Two bands from different sides of the city became quietly intertwined. Not through success, more through obscurity, as neither record was really fashionable and they both sounded slightly out of their time.
By the mid-80s, Manchester was brimming with bands, all playing venues like the Boardwalk, Band on the Wall and the Swinging Sporran. And across 85 and 86, both the Mondays and the Roses were everywhere and nowhere at the same time. There was no sense that either of these bands would matter beyond the city. Here's Factory Records boss Tony Wilson.
And there was a feeling that something else was going to happen. I had no idea what it was. In fact, when I used to talk about something happening, I had absolutely no idea that one of our little bands, a bunch of scumbags from Little Holton that we'd signed because they had that look in their faces in 85, 86. Obviously, it turned out that that was the Happy Mondays and that they were to, as the Daily Telegraph once said, to adapt the rhythms of American house music to Britain's punk indie sound of the early 80s and to create a whole new kind of music together with a whole new type of culture. We didn't know it was going to happen that way, and it happened almost behind our backs.
And that music would soon be inspired by a new sound that was forming thousands of miles away. As the Mondays and the Roses were finding their feet thousands of miles away in the clubs and warehouses of Chicago, a new form of music was beginning. House music was born from black gay culture that had transformed dance floors into safe spaces where people could lose themselves without fear. It spread rapidly through America, finding a second home in Detroit, another collapsing industrial city. And there it might have stayed had it not already begun filtering into a flourishing new Manchester scene for the night owls of Moss Side and Hume, where a single sound system was joining the musical dots that would form the blueprint of what was to come.
Zipper Show, live and direct, coming from Moss Side. Pop Show would be on stage. Hey, Zipper!
Soul Control, built and run by Anthony Stevens, was, by the mid-80s, busy throwing blues dances and semi-legal raves in community centres, gyms and school halls. At Soul Control nights, early house records sat alongside rare grooves, funk and reggae. House music didn't arrive in Manchester through the front door of the Hacienda. It grew first in community halls, shaped by black audiences, before it moved into the city centre.
In 1986, Mike Pickering and Martin Prendergast started the Friday Nude Nights, playing early house tracks, white labels imported or discovered in Eastern Bloc or Piccadilly Records. Mike Pickering.
So we were going over to New York to play like underground gigs there. I went over there, my mind was blown. To stand in Paradise Garage or Danceteria or the Fun House and these clubs, they were revolutionary as far as I was concerned. On the Friday night, I started to try and emulate that a little bit. I was playing anything from Motown to Northern Soul to Madonna, getting to the groove. So eclectic, but I was also getting these new records from New York and Chicago, which were Four to the Floor, Colonel Abrahams, Dar Braxton. That was the first night that really took off. I mean, we had like 1,500 and it was only 1,200 capacity. And it was a wonderful night. And that was the precursor to the Acid House nights.
In tandem, the Hacienda began reinventing its door policy. No longer was it about who you knew or what you wore. It became about whether you understood the room. If you came to dance, you were welcome. Mike Pickering.
The idea was no door policy. We want the Scallies or Perrys as they would call them. This is their city. Because everywhere in those days, if you were a scallywag, which most people in Manchester were, you couldn't get in at any of the clubs. They let thugs in ties and suits in. We dropped that straight away. It was packed in no time, you know.
The club, though, was still bleeding money. Every time the Hacienda needed cash, New Order, who were also directors of the club, were booked to play, and their fee went straight back into the till.
It's hot and sweaty here at the Hacienda, a club which New Order actually put money into. In fact, they say they built it with their own hands, but I wouldn't believe that. Anyway, please give a big welcome, live on stage at the Hacienda in Manchester, New Order!
Peter Hook, bass player, company director, and also head of backstage security.
I used to work there for money. Used to do backstage security and loading the gear in for £10 a night. And then I found out years later that Hacienda was losing £10,000 a month, which was our money.
The books may have been all over the place, but culturally something had clicked, even if the Hacienda was literally burning money.
Here's Hacienda manager Angela Matthews.
My favourite regular night yearly was New Year's Eve. So at midnight on the dot, we used to black out the Hacienda. We had 2 big screens, and on the screens would be the countdown from Big Ben. And then as soon as it had finished, then all the fireworks that were dotted round on every single ledge you can imagine were fireworks going off. Behind the bar, one fell into the cardboard box of notes that I had left behind there, and so it was up in flames. So I dashed to where I knew Hooky was sitting and was just shouting, "Hooky, come quick, your money's on fire." So we run back behind the bar, pints, any liquid that we could get hold of that were thrown on it, and then all the bits of burnt money was collected on shovels. And I think the next day Paul Mason had taken the bits I'd collected on the shovels to the bank, and for everyone that you were able to see that there was a bank number, they were able to give us money back. We always calculated that maybe £5,000 had gone that night.
In less than 2 years, house music had taken root in Manchester. Pickering, Park and Prendergast were playing it every week, and it saved the Hacienda.
Acid House, when it began, the music just had everybody in a trance.
Here's Peter Hook.
The demand, shall we say, was incredible. We would be turning away thousands of people every night. So it was a hell of a contrast to how it was in the early days.
And then some wayward holidaymakers brought home a little present for everyone.
Well, it was ecstasy. It was the ecstasy culture. It changed everything.
The feeling of ecstasy on the come up, there'll be a gradual disorientation and awakening of the senses. Your hearing will be a lot clearer, your vision may be blurred, but things will seem sharper. You get a tingling on your skin, your hair will stand on end slightly. The rush, as it's known, will just be like a wave going from the bottom of your body all the way up, of pure energy.
It was weird, really, because the Friday night was really big. We were playing house music, and then ecstasy appeared. And my DJ booth, located on the balcony of the Hacienda, it happened to me, you know, like a Mexican wave coming from the front door all the way down over about a 3-4 week period of people all of a sudden wearing baggy clothes, dancing quite robotic, you know, doing that kind of rave dance. And the whole thing just changed within 3-4 weeks, and it was absolutely euphoric and, yeah, magnificent. You know, the summer of love.
Over the past few weeks, calls have been flooding in to drug abuse counsellors about a new drug known as ecstasy. Users appear to be unaware that the drug is dangerous and has extremely unpleasant side effects.
Now, whether or not ecstasy actually changed music and how it sounded, that's an argument some of us could have until the lights go up. But it did definitely change how people felt about each other. The dance floors of the city evolving into places where strangers became allies.
With house music and ecstasy, Manchester was dancing. And here is someone who knew better than most, Sean Ryder.
The first E that I ever came across, these pals of ours came back. They'd been in Amsterdam, and one pal in particular brought some pills back. Bez had one, I had one, and from that day on it totally blew us away. Straight away with our mates, it was like, well, yeah, you take these pills, sell them. And that was the first time we saw some money. I'd run over from the Assy, and I'd go and do an hour in there, go back to the Hacienda, give it an hour or two later or whatever, and then go and do another bit of time in there selling. If we wasn't there, the pills was put in a safe. And if those pills in that safe wasn't took out of that safe, there was no party at weekend in Manchester. There was nobody else to replace that.
At the same time, a record was being made in Manchester that sounded exactly like a Friday night at the Hacienda. Voodoo Ray was built on a mistake. Gerald Simpson's sampler ran out of memory mid-phrase, and so the sample of comedians Peter Cook and Dudley Moore ended up being clipped, and instead of Cook saying Voodoo Rage, only part of the phrase survived. Voodoo Ray.
Alongside this, another sound was taking shape elsewhere in the city. Lush, textured and forward-facing, 808 State were pushing Manchester further into the future, almost using sounds as paint with a canvas. Together, they proved that Manchester was not just borrowing dance music, it was redesigning it. As the Hacienda dance floor filled, something else was happening a mile or so away.
I'm standing in the centre of a huge grey concrete curve, grandly designated Robert Adam Crescent. The name suggests the genteel streets of Georgian Bath, but after just a few years of Manchester weather, these flats bear little obvious resemblance. The paintwork's peeling, the rain stained the concrete walls, the linking galleries, planned as streets in the sky, are littered with rubbish.
The hewn crescents were half abandoned. Concrete walkways twisted like a science fiction set. The lifts never worked, dogs barked constantly, and the smoke that drifted across the estate smelt faintly, unmistakably fruity. It was here in 1986 that Jamie Nicholson smashed through the wall of his flat into the empty flat next door and started a makeshift recording studio, which soon became an after-hours club. A club that had no licence or closing time and no clear line between night and morning. Chris Jam formed Jam MCs, who DJ'd at The Kitchen.
Something that will not be repeated, man. It was just thick with people and everyone in this heightened state. Sweat, closeness, and closeness not just in proximity, but also just everyone, just that unity. The unity in those places was amazing. It's something that's very rarefied and cannot be easily repeated, really. Everyone was on that same thing, looking for that same height and wanting to share. The unity and the conversations outside on the balconies and places like that. Yeah, just amazing, absolutely amazing.
One regular visitor was Noel Gallagher.
When we used to go to the Hacienda in the 80s back in Manchester, afterwards there used to be, if you were brave enough to go, there used to be an after hours kind of, what was it? Because they used to have DJs in there. It was very, very shifty, and it would go on till like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. And they would play kind of acid house music. But as the night would draw to a close, the older DJs would get on at like 6 o'clock in the morning. They'd start playing old kind of soul stuff that you've never heard. And I remember the sun coming up, and I was just stood beside a guy. We were kind of dancing. And it was Manny from the Stone Roses, who I'd never met, but I was a massive fan. And I went, "Oh, you and the Stone Roses?" And he went, "Yeah." And I went, "Oh, wow, I've been to like loads of your gigs." And we chatted, and it's been like that's the first night I met him, was in 1988 at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I've known him ever since.
Noel Gallagher was just another familiar face around places like the Kitchen back in those days, but a few years later, he would, of course, change British music all over again. And that, as they say, is another story entirely. One we tell in our series, The Rise and Fall of Oasis. In the Kitchen, Jamie recorded everyone from Frank Sidebottom to another rhythmical new Manchester band, New Fast Automatic Daffodils. But this was also the birthplace of some of the city's most lyrical documentarians.
Everybody tried to be their most authentic, creative selves. That's what I felt is you.
Kermit, who before forming Black Grape with Shaun Ryder, was in the Ruthless Rap Assassins, who rapped in broad Mancunian accents about dole queues and high-rise tower blocks.
It was a real place for, fuck you, this is me, but not in a horrible way. People just turn up and, I like that flat, kick the door in and move in. It was cool.
Hume during the 80s was economically broken, but socially mixed. And the Kitchen became its heart and its soul. Ravers, students, punks, artists, musicians, gangsters, men, women, gay and straight, they all learned to disappear into the music together. But once that same energy moved into official venues, into ticketed rooms with posters and lineups, the stakes changed. Community met ambition. It's the 30th of May 1988, and at the International 2, a benefit gig has been organised in opposition to Clause 28, a law designed to silence the teaching of the acceptability of homosexuality. The night is meant to be about solidarity, and James are the booked headliners, with the Stone Roses in support. But the Roses do not accept this quietly.
Earlier in the day, unofficial posters began appearing across the city that listed the Roses as headliners. The Roses proceed to intentionally stretch their set, delaying the night and forcing James into a shorter set. In fact, by the time they finish, it's 11:30 p.m. and people have started to leave. James finally walked out to a half-empty room. The Roses were determined to make Manchester pay attention to them. And one of those who was paying closer attention was a young lad from Burnage.
I was desperate to see this band. I'd heard the records because my brother Noel was playing them, Sally Cinnamon and stuff, and I thought, I like this stuff. Borrowed 15 quid off my mum. Went down there, bought a ticket, offered tickets out, bought a couple of beers on my own, Billy No Mates, but felt good. Ian Brown come on with 2 mare bells to Wanna Be Adored, and the crowd were up for it, and I don't know, it changed my life without a doubt.
By the end of the 80s, the city had come alive and house music was spilling out of all the bars in the city.
The boundaries within music dissolved. The Happy Mondays were in the Hacienda most nights, as were the Stone Roses, and the crowds moved organically between different clubbing communities.
Manchester was now full of colour and rhythm. The summers were hot and the dance floors welcomed those who wanted to move. But dancing was only the beginning, because in the next episode of The Rise and Fall of Manchester, everything accelerates. The beat was locked in, the look was starting to form, and on one legendary weekend, the Roses took half the city to the seaside. And Sean Ryder has a dilemma. How exactly does he stop Bez being beaten up by a squaddy? Find out in episode 4 of The Rise and Fall of Madchester.